Here are spoilers for Hellraiser. This movie is colorful, and that's putting it lightly. Once upon a time, there was a man named Frank, and he was a hedonist by nature. And when he thought he exhausted all sensory pleasures that he could, he goes to Morocco to buy a puzzle box that he's told will open the doorway to a realm full of pleasure. He brings the puzzle back home to America, goes to his home's attic, and solves the puzzle. Hooked chains shoot out of nowhere, and they hook into him and then tear him apart into little tiny pieces. A strange human alien dude shows up whose head is covered in pins, and he resets the puzzle, which resets the attic. Later, Frank's brother named Larry arrives, and he's planning to move into the home with his second wife, Julia. Larry just assumes that Frank has been arrested for something because Frank lives fast and loose and everyone knows it. Larry is also trying to convince his daughter, Kirsty, to come move in with them, but she is not stoked on it because she does not like Julia that much. As Larry and Julia explore the home, they realize that there are traces that Frank was there and left in a hurry, including the kitchen, which has a lot of disgusting, rotting food. Julia discovers this box of pictures that Frank had saved, which show Frank in a very S&M kind of light. The following Sunday, they start moving their stuff in. Julia heads to the attic, and being in Frank's house, having his pictures, reminds her of the time that he and her had an affair. She has been obsessed with Frank ever since that happened. Meanwhile, downstairs, Larry gets this bad cut, and when he comes up to the attic, his blood spills on the attic floorboards. Kirsty takes him to the hospital, and Julia leaves the attic, and suddenly the floorboards start gyrating, and all this viscera and mucus and blood. It turns out Frank is regenerating. Later on, Larry and Kirsty arrive home and they have a small housewarming party. After the party, Julia goes back upstairs to the attic where she discovers this version of Frank that is not very complete. Initially, she's absolutely shocked and horrified. But when she realizes that this is her boo, she's like, cool, whatever. He tells her that the blood from Larry started his regeneration and that he needs more blood to fully regenerate and heal. At first, Julia's like, no, I could never kill a person. And then after a while, she's like, yeah, I could totally do that for you. So Julia sets out and goes on the prowl for men who she brings home to Frank, kills, and then leaves for him to suck the life out of. Then Frank tells Julia about the Cenobites, which are a group of people that he had escaped. He tells her they need to escape before they realize that he's gone, and as soon as he's all the way better, he will run away with her. Julia is absolutely juicy about this idea, so she agrees. So Frank finally tells Julia about the Cenobites, and what he says is that he got the box because he had exhausted all sensory pleasures on this plane, and he was told that the box would take him to either heaven or hell, and he really didn't care which one. So he solved the puzzle, and that summoned the Cenobites, which are basically really hardcore S&M alien bitches. They ended up taking him to another dimension and put him through the worst S&M experience you could ever imagine. So while this is happening, Kirsty is dealing with a stalker. It's this homeless man, and he keeps showing up at places that she's at, including the pet store that she works at. And he shows up and then eats a bunch of crickets. Gotta love that protein. Kirsty is also dating a man named Steve. Larry almost discovers Frank one day, and Julia decides to rely on her womanly wiles to distract him. As she's distracting Larry, Frank appears out of the closet, and he has a knife and a rat, and he ends up introducing them to one another. But Julia is able to convince Frank without arousing any kind of suspicion from Larry. So after Frank leaves, Larry is just pissed because he's been blueballed. The following day, Julia goes out to get another victim, and as she's coming home, Kirsty sees her approaching the home with this strange man. Suspecting an affair, she follows the two up to the attic. She goes in and sees Frank draining the life out of this man, and of course, becomes absolutely horrified. Frank at this point is skeleton, musculature, viscera, a few nerves, but he's not fully formed yet. He tells her who he is, and then he ends up hitting on her. Frank is disgusting. She finds the puzzle box and he gets very upset, and so she throws it out a window and then runs and gets it. She ends up going into shock and she wanders the streets until she finally collapses, and when she wakes up, she's in the hospital. The doctor ends up giving her back the box, and as she's playing with it, she ends up opening this portal into another realm. Not a lick of self-preservation in this girl because she decides to go in, and it is this very long, dark hallway. This terrible monster finds her and chases her, and she's able to make it back to the hospital room in time, But she did not learn her lesson the first time playing with the puzzle box because she plays with it again. And this time she summons the Cenobites. So this man, Pinhead, appears and he is the leader of the crew. And he tells her that some people regard them as angels or demons, but they're actually just explorers from another dimension. He tells her that they're going to take her and give her pleasure. And it's very clear that they do not know the difference between pleasure and pain. She's not super stoked on that idea. So she's like, yo, there was a man who escaped you named Frank, and I will take you to him in exchange for my life. Pinhead is like, no one escapes us, so that's bullshit. But we're gonna go with you and see if he confesses to it. Back at home, Frank and Julia are not sure what to do. Frank is aware of the danger of the puzzle box not being there. So Frank decides that the best course of action is to track down his brother, flay him alive, and wear him like a skin suit. When Kirsty arrives home, she does not recognize that her father looks literally like he just got stapled together. And when she tells him about Frank, he's like, oh, I already know about that. He's in the attic. We killed him. No big deal. She's like, yeah, big deal. Let me see him. They show her the flayed body of her father, who she thinks is Frank. Julia leaves her in there, and as she's staring there looking at this flayed body, the Cenobites appear and they look at it and they're like, yeah, that's not Frank. So who did this? Kirsty escapes and she finds her father. And when she's looking at him, she realizes that it's not him because he's hitting on her relentlessly. Frank has no idea how to take a no well, so he takes out a knife and he's like, all right, you're next. Kirsty escapes by pushing Juicy Julia into his arms instead. And he's like, sorry, and then knifes her. Kirsty is able to evade him at first, but eventually Frank finds her in that attic room where her father's flayed body is. We all know that villains cannot handle not delivering a monologue, so he starts monologuing about how he actually killed her father. But the Cenobites were listening to all of this, so they appear, and those hooks with chains appear again and rip him apart. Kirsty escapes the attic, and she finds Julia's body and finds that the Cenobites have also already gotten to her, so she is hooked and chained all over the place too. But Julia is holding the puzzle box in her hands, so Kirsty steals it and tries to undo the puzzle that summoned them in the first place. After a bit of kerfuffle, this ends up working and her boyfriend Steve arrives. At this point, the house is collapsing, so they're able to escape. Later on, they go to this bonfire and Kirsty tries to throw the puzzle box in, but the homeless man who's been stalking her appears. He walks into the fire and then transforms into this skeleton bird thing and then removes the puzzle box. He flies away with it and then goes to Morocco, where the original seller is waiting for him and is ready to sell the puzzle box to another unknowing person. When I was little, I remember my brother had the VHS of this, and every time I would look at the cover, I was so freaked out by Pinhead. And I am so glad that I didn't watch this as a kid because even as an adult, I was kind of like, ah, okay. Fortunately, the gore was very fake, but all the same, not fun to watch. It was a really interesting premise, though. I know that there's more movies in this series, so I think I'm going to watch because I'm really interested in learning more about the Cenobite.